So today we're going to be taking a look at how we can modify an image from Omar Z. Robles. Omar Z. Robles is a photographer of dancers, ballet dancers, freeform dancers, many other types of dancers, where he shoots them in the streets, in urban settings, to capture dynamic image. But we're going to look to be able to modify this image to create something different, to come up with a stylized variation that's going to help make the subject stand out in a different way. First, we're going to take a look over at the layers panel in Photopea. We're using Photopea as a free alternative to Photoshop. It has its limitations, but there are some nice benefits of not having to pay for the program, something that is accessible for everyone. So I'm going to look to duplicate the background layer. To duplicate the background layer, I'm going to go over to the background over on the layers panel. I'm going to right click and I'm going to duplicate the layer. Once I've duplicated the layer, I'm going to look to modify the size of this layer. So I can go up to Edit at the top navigation, down to Transform and Scale. With Transform and Scale, I can look to pull this image outward, grabbing the bottom right corner to scale up and draw more attention onto the subject. I'm going to enlarge it, but I'm going to look to adjust the placement so I can get more of the subject in the picture. If I want to continue to scale, I can slide the image over to grab one of the corners. For Photopea, you want to make sure that you're holding Shift to scale proportionally. When I'm satisfied with the size of the subject, I'm going to hit return. And it lost a little bit of quality, but that's just a limitation of the image that we're dealing with. And then with this image, I'm going to look to adjust the color to create one monotone look. And I'm going to get inspiration from the color of her dress. So I'm going to go up to Image at the top navigation, down to Adjustments, and Hue and Saturation. With Hue and Saturation, I'm going to look to modify this color overall. So I'm going to click on Colorize down on the bottom left of the Hue and Saturation pop-up. And we're going to look to adjust the hue and you see as I adjust the saturation, we're getting more of this green tone, but I'm going to look to get more of the pink tone that we saw originally from her dress. If I want to check it, I can get a sense of where her pink dress is, unclicking the Colorize. I'm also going to darken up this image so it doesn't necessarily become a distraction when we add in other areas. So I'm going to drop down my lightness to about 50%, to a negative 50. If I want to oversaturate the image, you see I drag it more right, we get a more saturated image. But I don't want to have it too saturated, so I'm going to drop this to about 65. And my hue ends up being around 25. Or negative 25. Now that I've had this modification, I can take a look to do a little comparison between the dress. If I feel like I want to modify the color, I can always go back and do that again. But for right now, I'm going to leave it where it is. And then I'm going to hide the background copy, in which I can rename this pink tone just so I can separate my layers. I'm going to hide this layer for right now. We're going to be taking a look at the original background layer. With the original background layer, we have this dancer jumping through the street. What I want to do is create a duplicate of this subject. The best thing to always do is duplicate your layer so you can always go back. If you mess up, you always have an additional copy. So I'm going to look again to right click on the background layer and to duplicate the layer. So now with this new copy, I'm going to look to select out just my subject to separate her on her own separate layer. Normally with Photoshop, we have the ability to use the object selection that does a great job of recognizing the area and selecting out just the subject. With Photopea, there are limitations, being a free program, that you're unable to get the proper selection when using the object selection tool over on the left side navigation. But we can still have a number of different ways that we can take a look and seeing how to modify. So just as an example, if I go over to the object selection, what you want to do is drag over the entire area of the subject. But you'll notice that when I drag over and I release on my mouse, it did well to select out certain areas of the subject, but not all of her. So it still missed the legs. So I need to incorporate or add this into the design. To add this in, I'm going to click and hold on the object selection to select the quick selection tool. With the quick selection tool, I can click and drag in the areas that weren't selected. So I'm going to drag in from onto the leg and then again over to the other side of the leg. But you'll notice that it starts to pick up some of the background of the cityscape. So if any areas I don't want to select, I'm going to hold down Option on a Mac, but Alt on a Windows computer. So holding down Alt, I can click and drag in the areas to deselect. Or release the Alt, and I can go back into reselect areas that were missed in the first selection. So making sure I get part of her shin or the bottom of her shoe. Again, it's not going to be perfect. But it is quicker than using the polygon or lasso tool to draw every little inch of the subject. So again, I can hold down Alt and deselect out areas that I don't want. If I want to zoom in, I can hit Control plus sign or Control minus, Command when using a Mac. So again, it may not necessarily be perfect, but what we're looking to do is get as much area selected, and then to help separate her from this cityscape background, I'm going to go over down to the bottom of the layers panel, and down at the bottom of the layers panel there is the add raster mask, similar to Photoshop where you have add clipping mask. This is add raster mask. When I click on this, the area that is selected is going to create a clipping mask in which just leaves the subject with no background. You'll notice that there's still plenty of little areas that I need to clean up and go around the edges for. But with this clipping mask, I can look to erase out using the eraser tool on the left side navigation or the paintbrush tool to paint areas in that may not have been selected. So I can zoom in. That way I can be a little bit more precise. And again, I want to make sure that I'm selected on the clipping mask. With the eraser tool, I can start to erase out. If I need to make my brush size smaller at any point, I can hit the left bracket next to the P key on your keyboard, or right bracket to enlarge the brush. This can be very tedious, but just continue to go around, take out areas that you don't need. If I want to jump over to my paintbrush very easily, I can hit the B key on my keyboard. It'll switch over to the paintbrush, where you see that I can paint in areas if I want, but I don't want to do that necessarily. I just want to clean up the little edges, make sure I get her shin entirely in the image. I can use a little hand icon to shift over. And again, continue to repeat the same process. Jumping between the paintbrush and the eraser tool. You may find it a lot easier to use the polygon elastic tool, just drawing around every little inch. That way you can be a little bit more accurate and you don't have to keep jumping back and forth. Because I want to make sure that this is a very well detailed selection without having too much additional areas, because the additional areas will distract from the overall design. Again, I can use the hand icon to shift around, and then continue to clean up areas that I don't necessarily want. Again, you can see the difference when I do erase, just cleaning out the edges so it's not so pixelated. Just a little bit smoother overall. We also want to make sure to get in the hair areas. With the hair, you have to have a very finite brush or eraser to make sure that we're not leaving any sky or areas that are going to distract from the background that we originally had with the subject. I may find it easier to take out some areas of the hair. And you as a designer have to make the ultimate decision on, is it going to help or hurt the design. So that just helps frame her hair a little bit better without being a distraction. When it gets to that top little area, I do want to erase this area out. while maintaining the rest of the hair above. You can see as it crosses over into the forearm area, it's going to be more of a problem trying to erase that out and cleaning that up. Again, just revealing the edges of the dress just so I can have cleaner line overall. I can always go back and clean up areas that I don't want. Again, this just shows that the object selection isn't the cleanest tool to be using. Again, I erased a little bit too much there, so I can just go back in with the paintbrush, clean up her shin area. If we zoom out, we have our subject separated on the background. Now we're going to look to add in some type. Again, we're going to recognize Omar Z. Robles, the photographer for this shoot. So we're going to be creating three different text boxes. maintain capital letters for consistency purposes. If I want to duplicate a layer, at any time I can hold down Alt on a Windows computer or Option on a Mac, click and drag to create a duplicate of that text or object. And again, holding down Alt. You'll notice if I wanted to try grabbing and selecting out an area, if I want to try grabbing the Z, it moves the robles. I have to make sure that I put auto select on at the top navigation. Underneath of edit, you'll see the little area with auto select. Make sure that's checked on blue. This way I can grab any of the text and modify the location to where I want. Next, going back with the text, I'm going to look to strengthen this, make it stand out a little bit better. I haven't decided on the font. But for today, I'm going to be using Dank 1. And we're going to create a little bit of impact with the Z in with his name. So we're actually going to place this and make it a lot larger. So I need to expand out my text box. And for aesthetic purposes, I'm going to eliminate out the period. It's more of a distraction for this design. But I'm going to look to scale up the size of this letter. And I'm going to enter in 500. And hit enter at the top navigation. And I can actually go a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go up to 700. This may seem overwhelming, but when it comes into the design, what we're about to do, it will help create a little bit more interest overall. And then I can lastly do robles as well. Just to check, I want to maintain consistency with Omar. I'm going to reduce this down a little bit to 65 pixels or points, and I'm going to also do that for robles as well. Making sure to switch over to Dank 1 as well, and 65. So with this design, we want to create impact. I want to use this Z as an overall accentuation piece that's going to help draw the eye to the design. So I'm going to bring back our pink tone. And with this Z layer, I'm going to look to rasterize this layer. Rasterizing the layer will give me the ability to edit it. So I'm going to right click on the layer and hit rasterize. So for right now, I can hide out a couple of these layers. And with this original background, I'm going to make another copy. With this original background, right click and click on duplicate layer. And we're going to move this layer up above the Z in the layers panel. I can rename this and call it clipping. And we're going to create a clipping mask with this layer. So I'm going to right click. I want to make sure that my Z is shown just so you can see what happens. I'm going to right click on the clipping layer and click on clipping mask. When I click on clipping mask, you'll see that inside of the image, or inside the letter Z, is our subject and that image that we are currently using. The placement of it, we want to make sure to place the subject in first. So just so I don't get distracted, I'm going to hide the original subject that we separated out. And with the placement of this, I'm going to look to make her stand out. I want to adjust the placement where her hand's going to be extending above the letter Z. And we never modified the size of the original background copy. So I'm going to actually reveal this layer. I'm going to look to place this subject and align this together with the original image. I'm going to lock this layer for right now just so I don't accidentally select it. This way I can move my object to where I want. And you see I'm trying to get that perfect alignment. So it appears as if the subject is extending through the letter Z. So I can just hide this layer to make sure that everything aligns. And now what I'm actually going to do is hide the arm and the leg over on this side, so it only appears as if the left side of the image is going to be standing out. So because I have my clipping mask, I have that selected. You see that little bounding box appearing around the black box. I'm going to click on my eraser tool. I can enlarge my eraser. Erase out her leg. It doesn't necessarily have to be perfect in the arrangement because you can see that it hides behind the area of the Z. If I wanted to, I could do the arm, or I could leave it. I have to make that decision as a designer. So I could go like that, making it as if she's leaping out of the letter into the open space. As I continue on, I can look to reveal and just check to see how the design is coming out. I can look to click and drag the pink tone layer underneath of my smart object, or underneath of my clipping mask. So we see her jumping off the page. And I want to make a little bit more modification to my pink layer. I can use the move tool if I want to adjust the placement, arrangement a little bit. I still want to be able to get her face in that background, but I want to make this this image a little bit more subdued. So I'm going to go back up to Image Adjustments. I can take a look at contrast. See, if I drop down this contrast, we lose a little bit more of the details in the background. It's not so vivid or overwhelming. I can always modify the color, but I want to maintain a darker variation so it's not distracting. I'm going to go back up again to Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. I want to match this a little bit better overall to the color of her original dress. So I can slightly adjust on the saturation, but the main area that we're going to focus on changing is the hue. And it's a very light colored dress, so it's not necessarily going to be perfect, but this is a little bit more reddish in the tone. Just so you can see, if I can lighten this up a little bit. But again, I still want to maintain that darker color so it's not necessarily the distraction. But we have that Z jumping out. If I want to pull this down a little bit more, just so she stands out even more so. And click OK. Then we can bring back the Omar and Robles. I'm going to look to modify the color of this. I can use the type tool, highlight over the text, and at the top navigation, change it from black to white. Okay. Then do the same thing for Robles as well. I'm going to look to place this around the Z. And now, as a designer, I can look to get a little bit more inspiration from other elements that can tie in or make this a little bit more dynamic or interesting. It might be use of diagonal lines or repeated circles just to help create a little bit of interest, so it's drawing your eye through the entire design. So with the rectangle select, I'm going to create a new layer to help create some graphics. I'm going to draw a very thin line going across. I can look to fill this line in. I'm going to go up to Edit, Fill, and because we have such a dark background, I'm going to go white as well. So I click on the drop down, choose white, hit OK. We see that it applies into the subject, or into that area on the new layer. I can deselect, Control D. And with this line, I can look to rotate it, modify it, go up to Edit, Free Transform. I want to make sure I'm being careful of the layers that I'm working with. We see that it's cutting through the subject right now. I'm going to move this layer above our clipping mask at the top. If I want to duplicate it, again, I can hold down Alt on my keyboard on a Windows computer, or hold down Option on a Mac. Take a little bit closer look. And design is about experimenting. It may not necessarily be the right thing to do or right design the first time, so you have to keep experimenting to figure out what's going to work overall for you. I'm going to add in another effect. I'm going to create a new layer. This time it's going to be a couple dots. So I'm going to click on the ellipse select. With the ellipse select, I'm going to draw out just a small little circle. Again, fill this in with white. Edit fill. I have white. Hit OK. I have a little white circle. I'm going to deselect. Control D or Command D on a Mac. Then I'm going to look to duplicate this little shape to create a little repeated pattern of circles to help give it overall design. If I want to select both these two little circles, let's rename it just so I don't get confused when we start having a ton of little layers. To select multiple layers over on the layers panel, I'm going to hold down Shift, select circle 2. Then I can hold down Alt, click and drag over the side. I'm going to repeat the same process, holding down Alt, click and drag. Then I'm going to look to select all 6. Again, holding down Alt, click and drag. You see that I'm just creating a unique pattern that's going to be something different to help bring in a little bit more design elements that are going to stand out. Now, if I take a look at my layers, it is pure chaos when it comes into the circle repeated over and over again. What I'm going to do is select the top one, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and select the bottom one. And then I'm going to click on the little folder icon, create a new folder so that all of my little circles go into one single layer. I could merge them all if I wanted to, but for right now I'm just going to put them all in a folder. And I can shift this around or look to modify it. With them all selected, I can go Edit, Transform, or Free Transform. I can look to scale it out if I want to make it larger. If I want to add in any other aspects, I can look to do that. color up a little other little shapes that are going to help make this more dynamic. And the last element I'm going to look to put in is a drop shadow inside of the Z. This drop shadow will help just make this seem like a cutout so that she is popping out of the image. So I go over to Effects. Also known as Layer Style. And I'm going to go to Inner Shadow. So we take a look at our screen. We can start to see a little bit of a shadow appearing inside of the object. I'm going to adjust on this little angle to modify to get the shadow to appear on if it's on the inside. And we can start to see that it's cutting into the areas where my subject is. So I'm actually going to look to move this layer upward. So taking the original clipping mask, slide this layer above. I might want to just look to modify, adjust, tweak this. I'm going to slide this over slightly to the right. With the layer selected, I can use arrow keys just to nudge it into the correct location. Again, I can hide the layer, make sure it's sitting in the right location. So off a little bit. And there you see it's lining up better. And there we have it. So if I wanted to get into modifying this anymore, I can continue on adding in design aspects. But for where this is at right now, I'm satisfied. If I want to crop this down a little bit, clean up some areas that I don't necessarily need, I can focus more on the subject, or cut out some of the aspects of the cars or design in the background. But I will go up to File. First, save it as a Photoshop file so you maintain the layers. And then back up to File, Export, save as a PNG or JPEG. Click Save. And then you will upload that for the assignment. Have a great day.